Hi, welcome to my blog today. My name's Tom Shue, and today we're going to talk about light meters. This is going to be a continuation of the yesterday's audio boo talking about ChromaZones. I just want to show you guys, in case you're new to light meters, what they look like. This is some light meter. This is my light meter. It's on my blog. I'll open this up. We'll close this real quick, and you can see that we have a bunch of different light meters here. This is an old photocell light meter. Just measures lights. It's got a little diffuser up top. This is an incident light meter. It's got the lumisphere on it. This one is a spot meter only, and this one here is a spot meter here and a luminance meter here. So that means it's two light meters in one. It's this one plus this one. However, this one here only measures like ambient light conditions. It cannot measure flash. This one here can measure flash and trigger strobes and do all kinds of fun stuff. So now that we know what a light meter looks like, let's back off. When you're measuring something with the lumisphere, you just pop the dome out, this little circle here, and you kind of hang it underneath the chin of or whatever you want to measure, and you push the button on the side and it will measure the light falling on that sphere. When you want to measure something in spot meter mode, you actually put it up to your eye like this gentleman is right here, and you look through it and you push the button and it's going to give you a reading. When you're dealing with a lumisphere or an incident light meter, it's going to tell you the settings to set your camera to render whatever you're measuring exactly the way it is. A black piece of paper will be black, a white piece of paper will be white. So for example, if you put a white piece of paper on a wall and measure it, and then you change the piece of paper to black and measure it, the settings won't change. However, because this is going to render it the way it is, if you use a spot meter to measure something, it's always going to tell you how to set your camera to achieve 18% gray. So the great thing about that is that now we know a relationship. Since we have both meters in one, we know a relationship between the 18% gray reading and the diffused value or the measured value, okay, which is the theoretical 18% gray. So let's close this down for a second. Before we go to this chart, I want to show you what I did here. What I did was I stuck a white piece of paper on the wall, okay, and I measured it with the dome and with the actually the spot meter, and that spot meter reading told me that if I set my camera at 125th, actually at 125th at ISO 400 at f11, that I would get an 18% gray piece of paper. Now, since my flash power, I started at f11 because that's in the middle of the aperture range on the lens. For example, if I started at f4 and I put that in the center of my 18% gray reading and made that my center point, my reference, I would run out of aperture before I could stop down or power up, because what I did was I set my power on my strobes one time, and then I closed the aperture down or opened the aperture up one stop at a time in order to achieve a full range from complete white to just below photographic black. It's just before we get to black. It's the darkest gray you can get before you get to black. And I'll show you how this works. But before that, I want to show you one more thing. I made those patches with this white piece of paper on the wall, and then I did it with color. I added these gels. If we look at this gel, you'll see that they're a Lee gel and they're a known value because they're a 195 Zenith blue. So if I did the same test with this blue gel on it, I'll get an 18% gray shade of blue. Then I'll get a -1, a -2, a -3, or a +1, a +2, and a +3. Okay, I'll show you how this works. There's all the green ones, and if we look at them, you'll see that I did them in blue, red, amber, and then a magic magenta. Okay, so let's go look at this chart and see how this thing actually works. So I made little squares, and what this is imagine going to a paint store, and if you walk in there and say you wanted a shocking blue or a hot blue or a hot pink, what does that actually mean? I don't know how you describe that to somebody, a hot pink. For example, this could be a hot pink, but how do you make a hot pink? Well, here we have a recipe that tells us exactly how to make a hot pink. So when you go to a paint store and you want to get a hot pink, they don't have a hot pink on their shelf. They can make a hot pink, and how do they tell you to select it? They tell you to go over to the swatch books and pick that color. And when you pick that color, you say, oh, this is hot pink. It could be called whatever you want, but the bottom line is there's a recipe to make that. And the same is with all of these colors that we have here. There's a recipe to make it. And what we did is we started with a fixed aperture, a fixed shutter speed, and a fixed ISO. Okay? And it happened to be F11. So we'll go back here to this 18% gray reference. Double click it. Happened to be ISO 400, F11 at 1/25. These never changed. The only thing that changed was the aperture, because aperture controls flash power. So if I stop down, say if this is 18% gray, and I stop down one stop, this could be considered 0 at 18% gray, could be 0. And this is actually the diffuse value. If you take your luminance meter and you measure something, and you're going to render it as it actually is, like a person's face, like a Caucasian person, and you measure them, the lumisphere is going to give you that theoretical 18% reading, and it's going to render them, and they're going to look just like they would because you used your meter and it measured the light falling on their face and used the incident light meter. However, if we wanted to change the background to say white or black, we could use that reference point to say, hey, if we want to go white, we need to go 2 1/3 stops over to get white, or 3 stops. It depends on your range of your sensor and lens combinations. However, if you look at the bottom, it'll say the 18% gray is in the middle, and white is 2 1/3 stops over 18% gray, and black is 4 1/3 stops below 18% gray. And this is how it's proven. This doesn't represent full range. It does represent pure white, and I had to put a drop shadow on it, but it doesn't represent pure black. When I say 4 1/3 stops below 18% gray gets black, we don't have a 4th stop plus a 3rd. We run out of color. It just looks dark black, so it just doesn't matter. So let's start at 18% gray, and we add 1 stop of power. So that means we open up from F11, we go to F8. That's the same as adding 1 stop of power. This falls back to reciprocals. When dealing with reciprocals, you could have many different ISOs, shutter speeds, and aperture settings that all equal the same exposure. However, your depth of field will change, or you'll get blur in the scene because you have a long shutter speed to get the same exposure in, say, a dimly lit room, versus a high ISO and a faster shutter speed, which give you the same exposure, but the image looks completely different. When you're dealing with flash, again, I can't stress this enough, your flash power is controlled by your aperture. So when we started at F11, and I started in the middle of the aperture range on this lens, I did so I didn't run out of aperture adjustment to control the amount of power that the flash was outputting. So when I opened up the lens from F11 to F8, it went from 18% gray to 36% gray. Okay? And now remember I said I was going to prove that white lives 2 1/3 stops over 18% gray? This is how we're doing it. So we're going from 0 to a +1, and that's a 36% gray. We opened up 1 stop. So now that was, remember, and I hate to repeat myself, but I want to say it again, F11 to F8. Then we go from F8 to 5/6. That's 2 stops. Now we're at 72% gray. Okay? Now if we go a 1/3 stop more, and we go from 5/6 to F4, that's 144%. Well, guess what? That's more than white. 100% is white. That would make the proper aperture setting would be here at 2 1/3 stops. Okay? Not a full 3 stops. That's too much. We only need to get to white, which is 2 1/3. A lot of people, when they open up 3, 4, 5, and 6 stops brighter than 18% gray, you'll start to see that the back of the hair from the background starts to get contaminated, and it blows out the fine hairs, or it just kills the contrast. So again, when you're trying to get to white, you don't need to go over 2 1/3 stops over 18% gray to get there. So let's go back the other way. Say we're going to stop the lens down. We're going to close it so light doesn't come in from that flash. 18% gray, that was F11 at 1/25th ISO 400. So we're going from F11 to where will we go? We'd go from F11 to F16. Okay? That's going to give us from 18% gray to a 9% gray. It's going to get darker. Remember I said black lives at 4 1/3 stops? Okay, that's photographic black. So let's go from F16 and let's stop the lens down to F22. That will give us a -2 and a 4.5% gray. It's still not black. Black is at 0. Okay, so let's go from F22 to F32. That's a stop of light. Now this is where my lens stopped, and I could adjust, say, ISO, or I could adjust something like that to continue, but the color was gone. I'll zoom in and show you. But photographic black, if you're trying to make a black wall, you need to go to 4 1/3 stops, because say for example we're at 2.5%, which is a dark gray, but it's not black. If you go to -4 stops, that's still not black. That is 1 1/8% gray. And then if you cut that in half, that'll get you to black, which would be 4 1/3 stops. Let's zoom in and look at these patches, because far away they really don't show you the kind of color that you're going to be getting. So let's zoom in. Okay, these are the dark gray patches. And let's start over here at the 18% gray, or at 0. So there's 18% gray. There's our +1, +2, and white. And I had to put a drop shadow there, or it fell. Okay, it blended in. So let's look at our 0 again. So there's an 18% gray with a red gel, and the red gel we used was Lee 106 primary red. So if I had a customer pick off of a color chart, say if I printed this out on a nice glossy piece of paper, and I asked them what color background do they want? Oh, I want this color red. Okay, no problem. That's a +2, and it is a Lee primary red gel. So I could just make that pretty quickly. I measure the background, give me 18% gray, I make my strobes go up 2 stops, and I can reproduce this red every single time. So say for example I'm using different lights and different setups, and I'm shooting for a catalog, or if I'm shooting for an album, and I need every image in this 5 or 6 shot series of images to have the same exact gray background. Say the background needed to be this light gray here, which would be a +2, a 72% gray. And say I was using strobes up close with a beauty dish, and this second image I might be using a big soft box, and the next one I might be using a grid with a snoot on it, but my background has to stay the same so all of the images look right on that page when I print. So I can measure the background in relationship to my diffuse value, which will be the light falling on my subject's face, and I can set that and get that same exact gray background, or I can get that same red background, blue background, amber background, magenta background. Anything I want, I can measure it and get it, and I can repeat it over and over and over, because this is a system. It's a system that we created based on known values. Okay, so we'll zoom this back out again. So you should grab some gels and play with this swatch system that I created here for you, of a -1 and a -2 and a +1 and a +2. The +3 and the -3 is really not needed for color, because as you see, let's zoom in one more time, that the color is, at 18% gray, which is the center. The colors, they're kind of like a maybe, how would you say, not really a saturated color and not really a dark color, like a medium color, an 18% gray color. And then they just get darker, but when you get over to this -3, they're all just kind of a real dark shade of that gray. There's not a lot of color there. But this is a dark blue, and it's a distinguishable zone. And as the blues go across, you can see that yes, they are bright. And you can use, if you want to create pastels, you can do +3s, which is 144%, and create these bright colors. However, you have to be careful to get your subject far enough away from the background. It's not going to contaminate or wrap around them and lose contrast in the image. Well, I hope I didn't confuse you guys with ChromaZones and how you use a spot meter to get there. This tutorial is put in place so that when I speak about how to measure with a spot meter and use that in relationship to a diffuse value, which is the luminance reading that we'll take of our subject in future videos, that you guys will have a firm understanding of what I'm talking about. I want to thank you all for visiting my blog today. Again, my name is Tom Shute, and until next time, we'll see you soon.